To our ninth episode of Seen It First, sponsored by Fictionary, your story editing software. In this series, we sit down with award-winning, best-selling authors to discuss first scenes, explore writing craft, and celebrate the stories that thrill and inspire us all. I'm James Gallagher, a copy editor and Fictionary certified story coach, and tonight we are very excited to welcome Nikki Davenport, someone the Fictionary community knows very well. For everyone here, for the next half hour, we will talk to Nikki about her debut novel, International Incident. We will look at the first scene of that in Fictionary, and we'll discuss all things romance. We'll have a few minutes for questions at the end of the session, but if at any time in an open forum, raise your hand or pop a question in the chat, and we will be happy to get to that. Nikki Davenport is the author of the Destination Lytua series and has been crafting stories about falling in love for as long as she can remember. She holds a BA in history and a master's in social work. Nikki also keeps busy dragon boat racing and with fellow breast cancer survivors and with her work in the education field. Nikki lives in Virginia with her two teens, her husband, and a pair of spoiled feline overlords. Nikki, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're definitely excited to have you. And I mentioned the dragon boat racing, and I wanted to bring that up because you were down for the dragon boat races in my part of Maryland a couple of months ago. So we were able to have coffee, and it was lovely to meet you. But for anyone here who doesn't know what dragon boat racing is, do you want to tell them?
Sure. So it's an ancient Chinese sport, and think of it as a canoe with 20 people in it. So it teaches you a lot about teamwork, things like patience, endurance. I'd never done any sort of team sport before. I was a band girl, so if you throw something at me now, I'm more likely to miss it than catch it. So this was really fascinating that a lady that is also a breast cancer survivor, a friend of mine, when I was first diagnosed, she told me, when you're feeling better in the spring, take a look at this video. And this is something that we do out of DC, and we'd love to have you join us. And it was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And it's also a good exercise for shoulders, especially after having had breast surgery or whatever else you might have had going on with the breast cancer. So it's a rehabilitative. And I was hooked from the very first one. I'd never been in a small craft before. I was terrified I was going to knock the whole thing over. Uh, but it is the coolest thing I've ever done. So it's lovely.
Wow, and I was very happy that he gave us the chance to meet. Sounds fantastic. And so I buried the lead a little bit because the big news here is November 4th, your debut novel, International Incident, dropped. So really celebration, a big congratulations, something lots of people dream about and talk about. Few people go through the whole process, get it all done. So it is a unbelievable accomplishment, stellar accomplishment, and we're all really excited and happy for you. And so for people that are still pointing toward that, for people that have gone through it, what have the last 11 days been like?
Like a dream, because I don't remember a word I said at the virtual launch parties, and I had two. I had technical difficulties with the second one, and I was so frustrated with myself. And I was like, okay, my husband was in his super calm voice. Well, have you tried fill in the blank? Have you tried this? And I'm live, sort of. And I keep thinking back to that. I was like, well, you're human. And who among us has not had tech difficulties? So I was told, lots of folks that attended said that it went fine, that my excitement came through, and that's wonderful. So I'm, of course, constantly refreshing Amazon, constantly refreshing Goodreads, to see, has anybody had anything else to say, or has anybody bought it? Yeah, so it's sort of like a dreamlike state. But this is amazing to have actually done it. Oh, thank you. Seeing some notes in the chat. Thank you.
And if you'd like to take everyone back a little bit and just tell us what your writing journey was and how you got to this debut.
So it all started with breast cancer. That when I was diagnosed a couple of months into the pandemic shutdown, I was diagnosed in May. You know, we shut down in March. And as I was in the chemo suite, getting my infusion and feeling like my entire life was completely out of control, couldn't have been worse timing, I had a seed of a thought. And I had enjoyed creative writing since I was a child. I have my fifth grade teacher, and we are still in contact actually, was one of the first ones to really encourage. She was like, "You're really good at this. I think we should enter the short story in a contest and keep up with it." And that little seed just, it took a long time to sprout, but it did. And I started writing compulsively. Every time I went to chemo, I was filling notebook after notebook. And if you remember the early days of the pandemic where everybody was jammed together and not going anywhere, losing your mind. I'm in a tiny condo with time an elderly cat, husband, two kids. I was losing my mind. So I was like, no, be alone in chemo. That was the only alone time I was getting. So I was able to concentrate fully. And I was really surprised at how it was just pouring out of me almost compulsively. And then I realized, okay, I might need to stop handwriting. Let's see about maybe putting this in Word. And next thing you know, it was like 20,000 words, 30,000 words. It kept growing. And I realized that I had no idea what I was doing. So after I was done with cancer treatment, there was a course that our county offered about publish that novel. And, I sort of got up my gumption. I made arrangements because it was in the evening so that the kids would be okay. And I decided I'm going to sign up for this class. I'm going to do it. After all this time, I'm going to do it. And they canceled it. So then I'm sort of like, oh, well, okay. So when it came around again, I signed up again. And then they canceled it again. And by then, I was more mad than scared because I'd had to change my whole evening. I'd had to worry about making sure I was here for work and whatnot. So I emailed the professor and I let him know that I was not pleased and that I had gone through all this stuff. It was a really huge effort for me to reach out and to actually do this, and to have that hope dashed twice was a bit much. So I asked if he would maybe could I hire him to coach me privately. And he led me to Joanna Penn. And from there, like the rest was history because her author blueprint 2.0, if you don't know about it, is just like it could be considered like a seminal work that it does such a good job of breaking it down for you with the steps. And I will never forget the first thing that really stuck with me with that is that you've got to get black on white. If you don't have a finished product, you can't do anything. So that led me to NaNoWriMo. NaNoWriMo led me to Christina Stanley doing a 4-part revision series with Jessica Brody. And from there, I discovered Fictionary because she was kind enough to offer a discount and a free trial. So I got in there and I was like, whoa, mind blown. This is what I needed to sort of tame this wild manuscript that I had. There was a good story in there, and it needed, I want to say like massaging. It needed some structure. And when you're a new writer, you have no idea what the heck you're doing. You're just writing that story that's in your heart. And it's a myth that, you sit down to the typewriter and then you bang out a bestseller on your first try. And you look at all the bestsellers on the shelf in the bookstores and you're like, man, I wish I could do that. That is not how that book started. The first draft that will never see the light of day was probably way different. And it's okay. But finding out that there's actually a process behind it and that there are people and a community that are willing to help you, to give you feedback, to answer questions, that was life-changing for me. I got the Fictionary app first, and then I joined the Fictionary community. And I'm thinking to myself, I have nothing to offer in support for anybody else because I'm newbie. I don't know anything about what I'm doing. And I was surprised because my background in social work and education actually really helped with, like, I'm always talking about self-care, uh, and those other things that as I've learned along the way, I have been able to actually uh, to use and share. And any knowledge that I've gained, I'm willing to put it out there and just sort of give as much, well, I hope more than I take from the community. And the community is irreplaceable. Whenever I talk to new writers, uh, I tell them, you've got to get connected with a writing community. And I just so happen to know a fabulous one that this fulfills me in a way that other people who are in my life and love me very much and are cheering me on cannot. When I'm like, I can't figure out this. I painted myself into a corner, which is my current problem with book two. Um, my husband is like, um, can I get you some therapeutic ice cream? Which, I'll take. But that he can't get into he can't sympathize and be like, oh yeah, I've had that happen, or that feeling must be terrible, because he doesn't get it. And well-meaning friends, you can't talk to them about the nuts and bolts and what struggle is like, because the struggle is real, especially when you've got a full-time day job, and now we have two cats and we're still in the same tiny condo. um, it can be very challenging if you don't have support. And I'm always just shouting it from the rooftops. Make sure you're connected with somebody, at least one person or a writing group that affirms you, that supports you and your dream. You could be not the greatest writer. And that's something, it's a skill. Like anything, it can be learned. You learn how to work with structure. Fictionary help with the 38 elements. Oh my goodness. That brought in so much rich detail to International Incident, because it reminded me of things like, have you involved the senses? What about the scenery? What about the weather? I was like, weather? That just adds a whole other layer of richness to the tapestry that makes it feel more real. And some of the feedback that I've gotten has spoken about that. Uh, uh, this just made me cry that someone said it was intensely beautiful and intimate. And I was like, wow, that's that's sort of it in a nutshell, what I was looking for, that whole slow burn, that it's so hard to let your guard down when you're falling in love, and that it's worth the risk, but you don't know that in the beginning. And that's what I was trying to capture. So it was a lot of fun. And like, I've got the look, here's the proof copy. Can you see it? Can you see it? So the paperback will be coming out next week. And as I was looking through it and reading it, I'm holding it in my hands and thinking, holy moly, I did this. I didn't do it alone. I did it with lots of help and support and encouragement, but it's here. It somehow, holding the book is different than seeing it on the Kindle, which was great. But there's just something about seeing your work. It's amazing.
And I think one thing you said that's so important is that there's this myth that if you're talented enough, you're just going to sit down and this story is going to flow out of you, and it's going to be, Shakespeare. It's going to be, and that's just not the reality. It's a craft that you have to work at. And one of the wonderful things about Fictionary community is that the people I think that come here are willing to put in the work. They're willing to develop their craft. And one thing I love about your story is all of the things you did to do that, and it's gotten you, where you are today. So I think that's a beautiful thing. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of writing and representation you want to put on the page, and the kind of characters that you want to write. On your website, it says a fun, sexy black on black romance, and in your bio you talk about showing black love in a positive light. So I wanted to hear about what you weren't seeing in the romance you're reading, and what you were able to shoot for to put on the page here.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. That's my favorite question. So when I was trying to find romance to read. And I've been a romance fan for a very long time, probably too long. I'm sure I started too early, like many people. And it didn't even occur to me at the time that I was not seeing myself represented until I grew older. And particularly as I was going through graduate school and thinking about things like equity, uh, I still wasn't seeing myself and my experience represented on like the bestsellers list. I'd look at them and be like, oh, well, that's lovely art. Read something and be like, oh, that's so great. There's not one single person of color in this entire universe that the author has created. And it's Toni Morrison's fault that that quote about if you're not finding the book that you want to read, you've got to write it yourself. So what I was seeing on like the Amazon top 100 for African American romance, my experience was nowhere in there. And I was sort of lamenting that. And then my writing partner said, well, what's on there is also somebody else's experience. And I just want people to read. So they deserve to have their experience represented as well. And that sort of took me aback, like, you're right. I don't have to be down or lamenting about not being represented. Put your money where your mouth is and do something about it. So when I was doing my business plan, because I'm such a nerd and I love, well, nerd pride, let me put that out of the way. We lovingly call ourselves nerds at my house. Um, Putting together the business plan, and you're talking about your ideal reader. And lo and behold, the ideal reader was like me. Uh, but I was seeing, middle age, and I did want to read about people who were, 20, because that's a very different life experience than, say, 46, which is how old a character that I have in a novella set in the same universe. That's how old they are. That just brings a totally different depth to experience and life and a certain being set in your ways. And I just thought, well, what would it be like if, like the Hunger Games, instead of being a sidekick or a side character, Rue was the main character? What if everybody in the audience looked like, or in the rest of the book, looked like Rue? And the best way I can sum it up is think about the Avengers. You've got this multi-culti cast kicking all kinds of butt around the world and in the universe. Fabulous. And then you have Black Panther, where almost everybody in that universe is Black, successful. They've got wealth with their country. They are technologically superior. All these wonderful things that you would want for any utopian society. But it was mind blowing to see that movie do so well. And it was encouraging because it was like, it is viable. It can't always be about the finance piece. Like, what is the budget? Is it considered a flop if it only made $4 billion? That's where, when you get gatekeepers involved in the decision making for what they decide to finance or what they decide to publish, they're not thinking about the author's vision. They're thinking about something entirely different. And that's why I chose to self publish, so that I could retain all of the creative control. That was important to me. And I said, I'm going to make sure I hire good editors, because we can all tell when you get a book that, like, if they only hired a proofreader or maybe a developmental editor, that, like I said earlier, it's not, you're not an island, and you need the support of others to help make your product better. And that's what I feel like I got with the editors. And I very consciously looked to work with professionals who were also Black, because I wanted to sort of bring others along with me in this experience. And that means, oh, thank you. Cover design. I love cover. Oh my goodness. I had the cover made before I was even halfway finished as a motivation. Sarah Dillinger, who is a member of the community, mentioned something about that and how it helped her get finished with her story. I was like, she might be onto something there. So I had to hunt high and low, find the right feel. And I had no idea so much goes into cover design. And we've got people on this call who do it professionally. And it's like a true marriage of a lot of psychology and Graphic design, it is amazing. And she nailed it when I didn't even know what I was looking for. So that is talent. Uh, so then I put it out there. It was like, okay, well, now that you're starting to write this, and all of the conventional wisdom from the writing community says, okay, you're supposed to start talking about your book even before it's published. And I was very shy about it. I didn't let family and friends know for a very long time. Of course, my husband and kids were the first ones to know after they knew I was up to something. Thank goodness it was for good, right? And then I came out to family and friends as an author, and I had to be emotionally ready for that because as someone who struggles with anxiety and depression, I knew that I needed to be prepared for any sort of blowback, any sort of negativity, or you're supposed to be a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but that's what I was supposed to be according to family. Uh, it's hard. And if you are not supported and strong enough in where you are in your emotional journey, it's going to level you. And I was ready when I finally came out. And what made the difference when I was finally ready, because I was on that journey for a little while, my therapist reminded me if you get a bad review, that's one reader in billions. That may not be their favorite category. They're not your dream reader. And that you're limiting yourself and cutting yourself off from the support that family and friends and loved ones, colleagues can give you, even if they don't like what you write. I write steamy romance, and I love steamy romance. I love that you can have that physical and intimate element as part of a love story, and it can be integrated. It's part of the universe, not something that's separate. And there's a lid for every pot. So all of the romance that's out there in every flavor, every color, everything, I'm all for it, especially without the gatekeepers. But what I wanted was something that was more intimate, sensual, more that slow burn piece. And I mean, I'm sure that I'll get to the point where I can write faster, but I'm not a not a fast writer right now. And I rather erroneously thought that I would have book two ready to go in January. And then I came to my senses when I saw how much effort goes into even the back end. That fine, you've gotten everything done. You've still got to do the proof. You still got to do the pricing and everything else under the sun. And I don't have any staff yet, so I'm taking advantage of free labor with my kids. I will just be out there with it. Although I did say I hired my older kiddo for some ideas for what did I hire him for? For blog post ideas. And the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. Is that right? I I'm always mixing metaphors. Sorry. Uh, but this is sort of like a collaborative effort. I would be writing and it'd be like, I need a last name. And one of the kids will respond, or I'll read them snippets and not. So I enjoy that piece of it with having everybody involved to a point. So getting it out there, connecting with other groups other writers that are writing similar things to what I am. And there are lots of folks out there. Uh, it's maybe a little harder to find than like mainstream, like Colleen Hoover. Uh, that's okay. There's still there's room for every author in this world. So reminding myself, somebody out there needs this story that is in your heart. So that helped me be brave and to put it out there, sort of like you cringe when you're pushing the publish button, but I did it. And I was more nervous about a virtual launch party than I was about the book actually coming out, which was, when you think about it, is that doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it's all nerve-wracking, but you did it. You really did. And before we get into the first scene, the one other thing I wanted to bring up was that there's been a lot of discussion in the romance community about issues of consent in romance, and consent has been something that I want to say, especially in older romance, but issues that are still coming up. But there's a scene in the book where the character Riddick is intimate with your protagonist, and they stop, and he says something to the effect of, hey, anytime that you're not comfortable, we're going to stop. It doesn't matter where we are. And I thought showing that on the page was another thing that you did that was important to have there. And this, and I don't want to imply that this isn't a steamy romance. This is really is steamy. There's a lot of heat you feel from the characters and their love for each other and their passion for each other. But I want to say I thought that was really important. And did you feel that that importance to get that on the page as well?
Absolutely. There's even a whole trope of dubious consent. And again, lid for every pot. But I feel like it's important to portray consent and what that looks like between a couple that some folks seem to think it's like a mood killer, like making sure you're on the same page about, safer sex or how far you are willing to go and what you are looking for. And this comes down to communication and the whole relationship building that when you don't have clear communication, there are things that are going to be doomed from the start. Somebody is going to be sort of tolerating something or feeling like they're giving in, and that's not good for a relationship. So there's that social work background coming in. And I was seeing a lot of uh let's say sort of implied consent. And for people that read romances, yes, they know it's fiction. Intellectually, I think they know it's fiction, but it still can mold and model what they're expecting when it comes to their own relationships. And when people are looking at my stuff, I want people to understand that, yeah, there's this big, strong guy that is still sensitive enough and tuned into respecting his partner enough to make sure she's comfortable, to know that she can stop anytime. And in the book, she's sort of surprised by that because it hasn't been her experience. And it ends up being sort of a point with him, like, you're not like anybody I've ever dated before, but it should be. Everybody should be that open and make sure. And this is something that I discuss with my own children who are teenagers now. That this is a big deal. It's a really big deal. And I have to dig it up, but there is a fantastic advertisement or a short that was talking about what does consent look like. And they said, how did the British do it? Of course, with tea. And it's hilarious because it just nails it with things like just because you wanted tea last night doesn't mean you should be expecting that you're going to have it today. You still got to talk about it. And you put sex in the place of that. And you're like, wow, I didn't even think about that. I've been married 20 years. So there's always room to learn something new. It was important to me to put that on the page. And you live in your book so long that you're thinking that you have gotten everything out onto the page and then end up having to read it. Try and imagine if you were reading it fresh. What do you wish was part of it on the page and get it on there? Find a way to get it in there.
And I think now we are going to open up the first scene in Fictionary. And it's also a great time to give an extra special thanks to Shane Millar running our presentation today. He's been sick this week and is still here. So extra special thanks for helping us out today.
Thanks, Shane.
This is the first scene. Obviously, this is the Fictionary software that's been such a help for so many people. And you see that you open your scenes, you edit scene by scene across 38 story elements for character, plot, and setting. I wanted to ask in this first scene, it's such important for kicking off not just this book but a series of books. And what were you most trying to accomplish in this first scene?
Well, in this first scene is just the main female character, so they haven't met yet. It was important to me to establish this mentor mother-like relationship between her assistant. I'm sorry, between the Queen's assistant and herself. Her mother died when she was in college, so she's been missing that element of support in her life. And Joanne, her assistant, is tough on her, but she believes in her. So I wanted to make sure I was showing that there are people pulling for her, people who are in her corner that don't want her to become bitter and jaded. And also wanted to establish up front the wound that she has, and she says it explicitly, I am never getting married. So, as soon as you say that in a romance novel, you know how that's going to go. But it's a romance, so you know it's going to be a happily ever after. Um, But I also wanted to portray that there's this constant matchmaking that is driving her up the wall, and that she's willing to sort of put up with a lot to make sure that the citizens of her country are getting what they need. So she's someone that is selfless, and but to the detriment of her own happiness. So that way I've set it up to juxtapose against when Riddick comes along, and then they're having these interactions where when they first meet, that he doesn't know who she is, and he's treating her in a way that she would want to be treated, except for, being rude to her on the phone. But you have to read it to find out how all that goes down. Uh, and also that relationships, it's not only your romantic relationships that sustain you, that you've got your relationship with yourself, your friends, your family, colleagues, all of that. You can't expect your romantic partner to fulfill all of that. That's far too much to ask one person. And these are people, well, although it's just Joanne and Kara in the beginning here in this first chapter, that it's implied that she's got folks that are around that are willing to help her and believe in her ability to lead. That when this opens, she's been the queen for 6 years. And when Joanne had her doubts when she started, but Kara brought her around. I just mispronounced my own character's name. Shame on me. It's Kara, and I make a point of making sure that that's said later in it. So that was what I was trying to establish with that first chapter, sort of set up the conflict, and this wound, this lie that's going to be healed by the end of the book. And this scene was not originally what I had as the first scene. And what ended up happening was talking to editors and getting the feedback for, okay, it would be more compelling if you did this, fill in the blank. And also looking at small ways that Kara misses her island home, and how her island home is very different than how even a room is set up for a conference. That she's, again, lamenting. I love that word. She's lamenting that the long conference room table is not conducive to teamwork, not conducive to collaboration. And that's the way that they do things in Lytua. So I'm trying to plant seeds for what is it like, because this whole novel doesn't take place in Lytua. It takes place in Washington, D.C., but I wanted to bring as many elements of her life and what it's like sort of being a fish out of water into this. And that's something that she has, that she can talk to Riddick about. So I hope I set that up well so that we can see why she's on her way to bitter and jaded. Uh, and that it's going to change. It's like, I've thrown down the gauntlet. The challenge is there. I'm never getting married. I'm not even going to date. And next thing you know, of course she's dating.
Well, it's a wonderful scene and a wonderful, wonderful book. And I think readers are going to fall in love with these characters. And it's so important because then they're going to want to follow on. They're going to be eagerly waiting the next book. And the last thing I wanted to just bring up was that the third big bucket of fictionary story elements is setting. And I've been around DC all my life, Washington, DC. My mom worked in DC. I went to school in DC. DC United is my favorite team. So how special was it to you to explore all of the Old Town Alexandria and all of the Pentagon City and all of the DC settings?
Well, I all of the settings that I mentioned are real places, and I wanted the city to be almost like another character. And it is a backdrop where these two are falling in love, and part of that is showing Kara what there is to see in DC, like having a very emotional experience at the African American Museum. Uh, those are things that are unique to DC. And that's what I wanted to bring alive, and maybe bring some folks to come visit and be like, I didn't even know about like the Frederick Douglass house, for instance, although it's under renovation at the moment. Uh, I've tried to look for some smaller known or littler known, littler, lesser known places. to sort of bring some attention to that. And it was just great fun to try and figure out, okay, well, where would this geography be? Like Riddick runs around Old Town Alexandria and bringing that element of realism, I think, because these are real places. And I'm hoping you can tell that I've at least been to the city. I didn't live in the city, but I'm very close and spent plenty of time in the city, uh, so that it's authentic. So that's what I was hoping for. And I'll be a little more challenged with that than the second book because that takes place in this fictitious country that I wish existed. And so I'm trying to build a rich culture and history. So that world building that I thought was only for fantasy writers, well, it turns out you're always doing world building, even in nonfiction, you're still building a world. And so I will lose that personal experience that I have with DC because I'll be transplanting to a tropical island. So maybe I just need to go do some research on a tropical island.
It's
I
good.
don't know how my husband would feel about that because I'd have to do that by myself.
I think it sounds like a fun idea. Um, well, and I know readers are going to be excited to go to Lytua. And the thing is, I know you'll probably be hearing about, people with DC is just one of those cities of the imagination that people all around the world will, like Venice or these other great cities of the world that people are going to really enjoy getting to go there when they haven't actually, been there in person. So that's a special thing too. And we are at the end of our half hour. It's been fun. Does anyone have any questions for Nikki? I also, but since we have a second, I also wanted to bring up there was a line in the book where it's from Riddick's point of view, and he says something along the lines of, I wanted to kiss her, but instead I just looked into her eyes and let her know that I wanted to kiss her. And I thought that was such a powerful line because, like, I copied it a lot of romance, and that's even more than the first kiss almost. That was, stepping back in that feeling. I thought it was really powerful and effective. And when you wrote that, do you remember writing that and feeling like, oh, that's a special thing I just did there?
I do actually. And just sometimes restraint can be so powerful. And he talks about it a little bit that he can sense that she needs to feel control. And instead of sort of steamrolling over that, he goes with it. He respects that. And it can be that tension that's leading up to a first kiss can be so delicious. And with that, I was imagining myself like, here's, you think the kiss might be coming, and you can tell that's, like you said, that's almost more intimate and special than the first kiss because you've got that element of, I'm also respecting what you need and sort of prolonging the anticipation leading up to it. So that's like, I'm glad that you like that that line stuck. I love doing that. I remember that vividly.
Well, congratulations again. And we're all here supporting you and looking forward to more of those great lines and more of your stories. And it's an exciting time. And thank you again so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.